Good morning and welcome to another of the Talk Wildlife Skype interviews. Today I'm going to be talking to Paul. Paul, you will have come across potentially already if you've watched the Heather Buttevant's Rock Pools interview, because she referred to his excellent book in that. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Allan. Morning.
First of all, your book. Let's just show people your book, because I haven't got a copy in front of me, I'm afraid. But
can you see it?
Yeah, I can see that. So clearly, Great British Marine Animals. It speaks for itself. A little bit about yourself. First of all, how did you get into marine and diving? And then just broaden on how you've how that fits into your life, just so we get a bit of an idea.
Well, I suppose I got fascinated with marine life straight off when I was a teenager, snorkeling on the North Norfolk coast in the sort of sandy lagoons there. And I loved being in the sea, I loved swimming, I loved being in salt water, and it was being able to watch. It was shore crabs particularly running around, and they do stuff. They don't just sit there, you see them dragging worms around and fighting each other and grabbing their mates, and so it was lovely to watch, and it was that combination of being underwater and watching animals, both of which I love, that just came together, and that sort of was the start of everything, really, pursuing marine biology, and then obviously I wanted to tell people about it, and the photography and the filming came after that, so it all followed on.
Excellent. And what surprises me, and it surprised me as well with Heather, when we talked about the rock pools, and we talked about what you can get around the shores of the UK. I don't know whether it's just me, I don't know whether it's general, and general people have this impression that, we're not in the tropics, we're not in the Mediterranean, therefore what we get around our shores is not very much and not very interesting. Now, I've learned from Heather that's not the case, and I'm sure by the look in your face you're going to tell me the same.
You're not alone. You're not alone. I mean, just a couple of examples. We were showing some at a couple of years ago at a local Biologist event, and we were showing some of our videos. This was in Devon, and a lady came up and she was looking at the videos, and she complained. She said, "Very pretty, but it doesn't seem appropriate to show videos of tropical fish at an event that's meant to be all about local wildlife." And we said, no, these are the beach just down the road. And she was absolutely gobsmacked. And the other one is I do quite a lot of talks, and when I was traveling by train quite a bit, I'd do them on my laptop, put them together, and often the person next to you would start getting bored and start leaning across and looking at the screen, and eventually they'd say, "Very colourful fish pictures, where were they taken?" And I'd always say, "Where do you think?" And they'd always say somewhere tropical. And when I said, "Oh, Torquay, Sheringham, Plymouth," they'd just be jaws dropped. So no, you're not alone at all. We're constantly trying to get that message over.
Yeah, and it was hammered home to me by the interview with Heather and looking at your site, that we're going to sort of look at a few bits shortly. There's an astounding amount of life around our coasts. And I think people need to start sort of going and looking, because I certainly would like to. So if I'm somebody that would like to, how do you go about it? Who do you get in touch with? Is there somebody that can help, or do the wildlife trusts do such things?
They do, yeah. The wildlife, I was going to say the wildlife trusts, actually, because they do some of the ones, particularly with a sort of easy accessible coastline, I'm thinking there are probably others, but I'm just most familiar with, Devon Wildlife Trust, Dorset Wildlife Trust. They do things like snorkel safaris and certainly rock pool rambles, and I'm sure others do, but those are the ones most local to me. So yeah, they're a good start. And Marine Conservation Society as well. There's a lot of education and awareness with local marine life. So I think those two are probably Wildlife Trusts and Marine Conservation Society. Good start.
Right, I'll put links to them on my YouTube under the video. Yeah, I can feel another obsession coming on. Yeah. Right, so that introduces yourself and introduces what you do. So with Heather, I talked about quite a few different species, but with you, I'm going to talk about sort of individual species. And when I say individual, I mean individual. I mean, this really gets down to the individual. So we're going to talk about Blennies.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of people out there that go, right, okay, you lost me now. What's a Blenny? You know, it sounds like it could be some kind of worm or something like that. So tell us exactly what a Blenny is.
Well, Blennies are a family of fairly small fish. And the one that most people probably be familiar with is the shanny or common Blenny, same, two different names. And I've got a picture of one here actually, one I prepared earlier. And if people go to a rock pool,
Yeah.
you know, on a beach, and they see, as often do, you walk up to a rock pool and you see a little greeny brown fish dart away and nip under a stone. 9 times out of 10, that'll be a shanny or common Blenny. But what's amazing is, you know, when they first see you, they just go away. But if you sit by a rock pool and just wait, often you'll see them come out, and they tend to prop themselves up on their fins, look at you, and sometimes you see them, the shannies actually feeding on the barnacle hands, because you know how barnacles have a little feeding limb that comes out the top of the shell and sweeps for plankton. And young shannies in particular feed, that's almost all they feed on, is the feeding hands. So they wait by the barnacles and try to nip the hands off before the barnacle can get them back in. So so that's the shanny, you see them. And then I guess the tompot Blenny is sort of the slightly more glamorous cousin of the shanny. They live in slightly deeper water, as you find shannies in rock pools. You will see tompots in rock pools on a very low tide, right down at the bottom of the beach, but generally they're just a little bit deeper than that, and they're a bit more brightly coloured. And one of the obvious things about them is they have these wonderful pair of head tentacles. But otherwise they're pretty similar to a shanny in what they look like. And
is that so? This them two species, is that it?
No, there's others. There's another little guy called a Montague's Blenny, and that's very similar to the shanny, and you could probably mistake it and just think it's a small shanny because you'd see them in the same place. And they, instead of having a bald head like the shanny or 2 tentacles like the tompot, it has a little quiff, a little sort of single quiff-like flap, and that's a Montague's Blenny. So the eldest of the Blennies, and they feed on. And they feed on barnacle hands. Even the big ones feed on barnacle hands. And then there's a couple of others that live in deeper water, and also, interestingly, a couple of other species of Blennies that we're seeing more, probably with sea warming, just extending their range. So a few different species. Right. And from a sort of conservation point of view, are they, you know, what status have these got? Are they rare? Or are they common? They're reasonably common, but like any territorial fish, you know, they depend on a good habitat. So the better we keep our habitats in good condition, and I think the better. And I think going back as well to what you were saying about how, you know, raised awareness, and because I think if people think of our sea habitat as being grey and uninterested, not much living in it, they won't care about looking after it. And I think that's sort of the end product of what Heather does. What I want to do as well is make people realise what's there, and then suddenly, oh, it's vibrant, it's amazing, and they want to look after it. Yeah, well, hopefully anybody that's seen Heather and your videos on Talk Wildlife, next time they go on holiday to the seaside, they'll look at it in a completely different light. Yeah. And I think it's right, because I mean, you know, I'm into wildlife. I'm most would say obsessive about wildlife, and you know, everything from sort of birds through moths to gulls and fungi. And the one thing that I've never actually paid attention to until now is what happens on the beach and just off the beach. And you know, that's something that I'm aiming to put right. So thanks to you and Heather for that. So when I introduced what we were going to talk about, I said that we were going to sort of talk about an individual species, and we've talked about a few species, but it goes beyond that, because you've got a study that actually looks at individual fish, which is
an amazing concept, and you know, we've got some great video to show. So can you tell us a little bit about your study first of all, and then I've got 2 of your VMO videos in the background that I'll share with people. Just you tell me when you want to go to them, because we've discussed which ones they are. You just tell me when you want to go to them.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Yeah, what's amazing? I mean, Tom-pot blennies are great animals in all sorts of ways. You know, they're very charismatic. They have very complicated, we'll touch on this, very complicated social and sex lives for various reasons. And they're very bold. They will carry on doing their natural behaviour even when you're there quite close with a big camera and lights, which is great. But even better than all that, I think, is the fact that they have these quite intricate skin markings all over their body, and they are unique from individual to individual. So with a photograph, close-up photograph, you can recognise individuals, and it all started because we were doing a lot of filming and photography on these, and they have territories as well. And we started wondering, is it the same one we see every year, or certainly all year? Is it the same one the next year? And this wasn't known. Whether it was known that male Tom-pot blennies had territories, it wasn't known whether they kept the same one. And blow me down, you know, we suddenly realised, looking at pictures, you can totally, with certainty, tell an individual, and then you can follow it through. And then we found, you know, we've got one male, because just say, as well as for the scientific papers, they have numbers, but they have names as well to sort of help engagement, help our memory as well. And Bradley is a particular star, and he's now, just haven't been able to see him for a while, of course, but he's in his 7th year in the same spot, 7th breeding season, rearing eggs in.
And which species are we talking about here?
Sorry, all Tom-pot blennies.
Right, and
Blenny.
So you say 7 years. So how long? What's their lifespan? How long do they live for?
Well, we think at least 10, because he was mature before he, you know, when we first got to know him. If I had to guess, it's probably around 10.
Right.
Difficult, because I mean, one of the things we're now being able to do, looking back through photographic records, is identify some of the territorial ones when they were youngsters, sort of vying for, and you see them being bullied out of places and vying for territory, and then when they're a bit bigger, getting their spot. So, and I think in aquarium, people have found chamois can live 15-20 years. So that sort of order, I guess. Yeah.
So again, quite a long lived fish, really. Yeah.
Great.
Should we go to one of your first video, and you can talk us through what's going on. So we'll do the House Proud Dad, which, as I mentioned to you earlier, I thought when I saw that headline, it was one of the first ones on your VMO, and I thought, oh, it must be about you.
Definitely not.
But it's not. It's about a fish.
Definitely not.
So I'll share screen, and then if you can talk us through what's going on with that, and then I'll go to the next one, and you can talk us through what's going on with that, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a bit more about the study and your findings.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so this is the home crevice in the reef. You can see very colourful with all the sponges and sea squirts and algae and so on. And Brett, this is Brett, a territorial male, and there's been a storm, and it's quite clear now, but in the storm there are lots of little bits of seaweed floating around, and they've landed on his eggs that he's guarding. I'm not sure if you can see the eggs, they're further back in the crevice, but one of his jobs, as well as keeping anything away from the eggs that's going to eat them, his job is to sort of clear any debris that's going to rot and affect the eggs. So you can see he's picking up mouthfuls of seaweed and swimming out to the front of the crevice and spitting them out, and then he goes back to get another lot. And one thing you might see about him, as he turns, you might see a sort of pale bulge under his belly, and they are special glands, and they on a male blenny, they produce a pheromone to attract the females, and also they even might have an antibiotic that gets wiped on the eggs. So yeah, there's so much sophistication here.
Yeah. So, and what we're looking at there is, I'll start this playing, but I'll pause it. Was the male?
That's right.
Is it the males that play the biggest part in looking after the eggs, or is it?
Yeah,
done as
absolutely. And intriguingly, it's very common in, well, it's all the Blennies virtually have that system, and an awful lot of shallow water fish in general have a male with a territory, and the females just visit, lay eggs, and then depart, and the male stays and does all the egg maintenance and rearing. It's quite common, as I say. Intriguingly, for complicated reasons about why it evolved, but and all the Blennies that I'm aware of have that system. So, and it's easy both ways. The several different females will lay eggs with a male,
right,
and the females will also lay their eggs with several different males. So it's as I say, free and easy both ways, but it's probably very complicated in how they select. You know, they're both choosy. The females want to lay their eggs with the best males. The males will only want the best females to lay eggs, and that's why the social life of Blennies is so complicated.
And are they like other sort of fish that lay a lot of eggs? You know, is this large numbers we're talking about?
They lay probably thousands, but in terms of the fish world, it's quite small in that they're not, because their strategy is to produce relatively few eggs and look after them really well, rather than fish like cod or plaice that produce sort of, you know, massive numbers of eggs and just let them drift. So the Blennies, you know, few eggs, but look after them well. And
what do they feed on?
Top Blennies probably a whole mixture of things. They small crustaceans, you know, small crabs, worms. They'll eat some seaweed as well. I should think. I mean,
worms, yeah,
and I think the male has to be very sort of omnivorous, because he can't go far from. You know, he's got the eggs for a few months, spring and summer, and he can't turn his back on them. He's got to stay there, otherwise all these egg thieves, as they're called, will come and try and eat the eggs. So he's got to be able to eat really anything that drifts past his home, probably. So he can't afford to be fussy.
Right, which probably brings us to this video. So I'll play it, and then you can sort of again tell us what's actually happening here.
Yeah. Now the Blenny at the front is a visiting female, and she's laying eggs. And the guy behind is Barry, and you can see he's now coming to the front, and you could probably see his gland there. Now, the smaller Blennies just arrived, and Barry on the left thinks it's another female. He thinks it's his lucky day, and he does this dashing around. You can see the gland under his belly now, and he does this dashing around that a male will do when a female arrives. So, but you'll see that the new female, we thought it was another female as well when we initially saw this, but and Barry's going off now, and the real female, original female, is leaving, and he's sort of escorting her away. He's not chasing her off. He's probably sort of seems to be escorting her. And as he swam there, you could see the gland, and now he's going back, and this is the supposed second female. But what we now know is that this is actually a male sneaker. So this is a young male that pretends to be a female and coming in to lay eggs, but he's actually fertilizing some of the eggs that the real female has left. And if you look before, you saw he was very keen to sidle in next to the real female as she laid her eggs. And what's funny now is that Barry is beginning to get suspicious. He's doing a lot of nibbling of this newcomer, which is quite normal. That's the normal sort of courtship behaviour, nibbling and nudging. Did you see that? He suddenly realised.
Yeah, he realised. Yeah,
that he'd been duped. But this sort of, and why? It's because the males put so much effort into guarding the eggs. that it gives this opportunity for sneakers to spend a lot less effort and get a bit of, you know, genetic input, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. So let's come back to your study. So obviously we could see by the video, when you were talking about the video there, that you know these individuals by name, and you're doing that by the patternings on the skin. What's your findings? What was your objective? What were you trying to achieve? And what are your findings from the study?
Well, I think initially that we were just trying to answer that question, how long do they keep territories for? Because it just wasn't known whether they can keep them. And interesting as well, because you often didn't see them over the winter. So where did they just spend the summer there with the territory, then they go off into deeper water or die, or maybe, and that's it. But what we were finding is that, you know, it was the same Blenny, and you think, well, surely they haven't gone away and come back. And what we then found is that they're still there in the winter, and they hide away deep at the back of the crevice, and because they don't need to, you know, in the summer they want to be out there at the front displaying, showing what fine chaps they are for the female visitors, and but in the winter they hide away. And I mean, one of the remarkable things about them is that some of these crevices that they're staying in are just a couple of feet below the surface at low tide, and they're on reefs facing southwest, and you see these massive storms coming in, including in, you know, the famous 1314, and you think the forces that those rocks will be exposed to, you know, and that little fish, sort of that size, is staying there, and they wedge themselves in with their fins right at the back. So they're tenacious. So sorry, that was one of the things, whether they retain territories, and then we started wondering whether you know, is it different females that are coming back? Do the females just move around all over the place? But we find that though they might not have a territory like the males, but they have their preferred places on the reef. They seem to stay around in the same area for years. And then, as we watched something else, it wasn't known that tomplot blennies had sneakers. Other tropical blenny species, they knew they had sneakers, but until this, we didn't know. So that was a new finding. And generally, so a lot of new interesting things about this species. It was also a lovely demonstration of this photo technique, because most other work on blennies, as far as I can gather, where they've identified individuals, they've had to mark them in some way with beads or tags, you know, which is potentially invasive, or they've only been able to keep track of a few individuals. But this photo technique you can use on a lot of individuals, and obviously you're not interfering at all with the fish. And then also, big thing is not just gaining the scientific knowledge, which is very interesting, but knowing about the lives of these individuals is a great way of engaging people. You know, to say, oh yeah, there are these colourful fish living out on that reef that do this, that's one thing. But when you can say, oh, this is Bob, he's been here for 3 years, or you know, Barry's, you know, got bit injured in fighting, and we're watching him recover, and things like that. Once you start to make individual fish living in a place, it just really helps people understand the complexity of the habitat and the sort of interest and just wonder of it, really.
So, of all of the named fish, who have you had the longest relationship with?
I think it's Bradley. As I say, as I said earlier, they have numbers for the scientific studies, but we give them names as well. And Bradley just happens to be, he was in his 7th breeding season in the same place. So and quite typically their males sort of stay 3 and 4 years. But you know, it's so there's certainly some crevice territories that are better than others as far as the blennies go. So you see the males at the top of the game in those, and then the other crevices which are a bit more exposed, perhaps more vulnerable to predators, you see the young wannabe males in there, and the old scarred guys. So in the less favourable places. So I mean, yeah.
So do they have territorial fights? Is it just posturing? How do the males interact over territory?
They fight. We sometimes see this, and in fact, there's a couple of Vimeo clips, because they generally, there's a lot of, I think with all animal, as in a lot of animal fighting, there's a lot of posturing, because they don't want to risk getting injured. You know, birds and mammals the same. So there's quite a lot of posturing, but they do come to blows as well. And one of the things they do a lot of is they bite round the lips, and they get hold of each other's lips, and with their teeth, sharp little teeth, and you see sometimes male blennies with quite a bit of their lip tissue missing. Looks quite gruesome, but in remarkably, in a few weeks it grows back, and they look like sort of scarred old fighters or whatever, with the lips slightly sort of grey and beaten up, but it does grow back. So and another thing, identifying individuals, you know, you do.
They seriously, even when I was watching there, when you were talking us through it, it is fascinating to watch them. Just one more question before I talk to you about this engagement that you mentioned, and that is, we talked about what they feed on. What feeds on them?
Right, that's interesting. I think the one animal that certainly feeds on them is conger eels, because we've actually seen, it's the only animal we've seen eating a tompock blenny, and it certainly fits, because congers will eat small fish, and they can get in the crevices where the blennies are. And the only conger we've seen eating a tompock was actually quite a young conger. So it was I think it was just big enough to eat the blenny, and it was struggling with it to get in, but it was small enough to get in the crevice. But I mean, generally, I think they're pretty resistant, because the blenny we saw being eaten wasn't one of our recognised ones. It was somewhere else. And touch wood, I don't think we've ever seen a blenny lose its territory over a breeding season. So you know, they're pretty tenacious. And I think one of the key features of I said some crevices are better than others. I think is that the ideal blenny home has a really tight, narrow bit at the back where you can hide when a conger eel comes, and a nice open bit in the front where you can show off for the ladies and get them to come in and lay eggs. And the best spots seem to have that ideal combination.
Excellent. And is there any threat to the eggs? So clearly, the adult can go to the back of the crevice, but then the eggs are exposed. So what are the key threats to eggs? Is it other fish eating them?
Yes. There's a fish called a clingfish, which is a well-known egg thief, and you see them go for the eggs, and certainly they seem to wait for blennies to be distracted, and you see the male chase them out. One of the funniest things is see them chase off crabs, because I don't know if Heather mentioned a crab called velvet swing crab that has red eyes, and it's always sort of portrayed as the rather angry crab, and it's quite fierce when you pick up one on the shore, and it tends to set its claws, and so these red eyes look very fierce, and they look fierce until you see a tompock blenny take one on, and then there's no match. They have a very skillful technique of going round the back, biting it on the backside and on the legs, and then they sort of use a combination of nipping at it and then using their muscular tail to push it out of the crevice. And it's funny because everybody thinks of these crabs as the hard nuts of the shore, until, as I say, tompock blennies, sort them out.
While they're getting beaten up by a poodle.
Yeah.
Right. So we talked at the beginning about how people can get involved in this, and you've also touched on engagement through being able to show people individuals. I believe that you have, or your wife has produced, an excellent book for children. I know you've got it handy on your desk, so just
Yeah.
show people. You might want to hold it in front of you because it's because of how the. So yeah, I mean this again. You know, I haven't actually got a copy, but from what you've shown me so far, it's great because it doesn't use sort of cartoon fish. It uses real fish. And it gets this story across. So what's the purpose of the book? How is that best used with children?
I think it's to show. I mean, it's a whole mixture. I can't really show the pages, but it's got a mixture of sort of story from the Blenny's point of view, a particular Blenny with his home, and it's also got quite a lot of information about the creatures, you know, that he eats, that might eat him, his neighbours, and that sort of thing. So it's got a lot of information in on the marine life, but because it's told from the Blenny's perspective, it's sort of very engaging, but also it's real. It's not sort of fanciful. He really does have these neighbours, and he really does eat this and that. So I think it's a good combination of in that way, and it gets over. I mean, adults love it as well, and they think, yeah, for those, and you say all these photographs, just taken off our beaches, and again they're staggered by that.
Yeah. So I mean, the book sounds great. I'm a big advocate for sort of education with kids, so that's why I really wanted to make sure that we got in for the book. I have to say that it's been really, really interesting talking to you, and I'm going to go back and revisit your Vimo on a number of occasions because there's some fantastic videos on there. I kept getting distracted. That's why I said to you earlier, I'm not quite sure which videos to show because there are some really, really good ones on there, not just of Blennies, but of other things.
No, there's some others. Yeah.
So for now, thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I think it might be worth us talking together, unless you've already got something. I think what's this of general interest, you know, to people who are into wildlife, but those that are into wildlife photography and are looking to get into underwater wildlife photography might find it, you know, very beneficial for us either to do a similar video, but about how, you know, what techniques you use, unless you've already got something I can point them to when I put this video live.
Not really on techniques. I think if we did another one, what I'd love to do is look at some other animals as well. I mean,
Absolutely,
I'm happy to do a photography one. I mean, just an example, the cuttlefish. I mean, what an incredible animal. People find this little sort of white thing on the beach, and some people think that's it. You know, it's just the bone out of the middle of this very complex, intelligent animal, and it's an invertebrate, and that's just off. Just off our shores as well, so you know, and crabs and so on. And if I could just give I know you can put links in as well, but I do an Instagram and as well, and just an example of that, I do a Tom Pot Tuesday. I only allow myself to do Tom Pots on a Tuesday because otherwise I'll go on about them all the time. So all the rest of the time it's about other marine life.
Right, well, I will point to that, and also we will talk again. And thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and take care.
And thanks ever so much for getting in touch.
Thanks. Take care. Bye now.